I was told I have about 35 minutes. I added the 5 myself for this talk. Inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to try to keep my conversation focused to a college student audience. I don't want to cater this as a general talk, but I wanted to kind of focus it to a student audience, inshallah, on the subject matter of appreciating the Quran. And I'm cognizant of the fact that there may even be some non-Muslims in the audience, and so I'll try to avoid Arabic terminology in this conversation. And at the same time, if I do use some Arabic terms, I'll try to do my best to translate those terms and make them easier to process. Okay. So I want to start with a very straightforward phenomenon, and that is that the Quran, for most people, Muslim and non-Muslim, is a veiled text. What that means is it's very difficult to just pick up and read and process. And the reason for that is, there are several reasons, and the primary reason for that is it's being introduced to most of the world, Muslim and non, in translation. Most Muslims do not have qualifications or training in classical Arabic, the original language of the Quran. And so either they're reading the translation of the Quran in Persian or Urdu or Somali or even Chinese, Cantonese, English, French, German, etc., etc. And like any literature, there's a lot lost in translation. There's quite a bit lost in translation. Especially older languages, because older languages had something, what the Prophet called Jawami'ul Kalim, the ability to encompass a lot of meanings in very few words. So even if you translate, for instance, one line for another line, like a line of Arabic to a line of English, there's a lot more nuance in the Arabic line that is completely lost. So you got kind of a droplet of the meaning that was suggested in the Arabic text, and you got very little of that communicated in the English text or whatever other translated text. There's an additional problem, and that is that in old languages they had their own figures of speech. They had their own, sort of things they said that they didn't mean them literally, they meant them figuratively. And that's not just true of ancient languages, it's true of our languages also. Okay? For instance, in English, when you say to someone, that is extremely cool, that is so cool, that can't be taken literally, unless you live in, Boston or something, but generally, when somebody says it's cool, it's nice, it's not to be taken literally. And these are things that are dependent on context. So even though the English language has been around for a while, if you said that is cool to somebody 100 years ago, they probably wouldn't understand you the same way, right? So language isn't just about translating a word from a dictionary, it evolves in a context. So the original context of the Quran is very particular. And a lot of times those figures of speech that are in and of themselves very beautiful and very deep and very contextual, they get translated literally in our translations, and then we read them and we just scratch our heads and go, what's this talking about? What does this even mean? So this is probably, I would argue, the biggest problem in Quran education, or awareness even, or literary appreciation for Muslims and for non-Muslims. It is, in fact, a veiled text. And to unveil this text, so now you say, well, translation doesn't suffice, what else can I do? What else can I study or maybe access to maybe try to understand this book better? Well, you've got two options before you, right? You've got one option is become a student of classical Arabic, which is probably not an option for most people. Maybe some very driven, motivated individuals like myself 10, 12 years ago, I decided I want to learn this language and take it seriously. And Allah blessed me with opportunities that made that easy for me, but I can't say that that's going to happen for everybody, right? And those opportunities aren't necessarily going to present themselves to you. So the primary access is probably not going to happen for most people. Primary access means you've accessed the language, you've mastered it, or you have a degree of proficiency in it, where when you read it, you kind of know what's going on. Well, the only other access then is secondary. Secondary means translation, whose limitations I just tried to present to you. But then there's an additional body of literature that seeks to help people understand the Quran. That literature, that body of literature is called tafsir in Muslim discourse. The technical academic term is exegesis, right? Text analysis. And so these books of tafsir are written in foreign languages also. So in English you'll find some books of tafsir dedicated to explaining the contents of the Quran, contextualizing the ayat, the verses, the surahs. Surah is the term for chapter, but they're not the same, so I'll stick to the term surah. These units of the Quran and these statements in the Quran are explained and contextualized in detailed conversation, etc. But personally, myself, I'm still not satisfied with where we are in producing good, heavy literature, accessible literature, and deep enough literature in the English language, which is probably the most universal language in the world today. I don't think we've done our job as Muslims in producing good enough literature on the Quran in the English language. That's my personal opinion at this point. And one area that particularly hasn't even gotten attention in any language, even in Arabic much yet, is the genre of literary appreciation. So I'm going to spend the rest of the few minutes I have with you guys just to give you an idea of what does it mean to engage in a study of literary appreciation of the Quran. Approaching the Quran as literature. Just as literature. You just want to, you're looking at this ancient text with forget your religious background or your philosophical inclinations. You're just looking at this text from the point of view of literature. Of course, the Muslim looks at it for spiritual guidance. The Muslim looks at it for, as the word of Allah, the divine word that connects to us. It makes us shed tears in prayer, etc., etc. But for the rest of the world, at least we should have some way of them also connecting with this text in a meaningful way, and kind of unveiling some of these things, and removing some of these veils that are keeping people from a direct understanding of the text. And so before I go on one last tangent, and that is, what if we don't do this? What if we as Muslims, some of us at least, don't take up this task and don't produce this kind of genre, this kind of literature? Well, then what you get is the kinds of quotes you see on CNN from the Quran, or on Fox, or whatever else, where a verse of the Quran is quoted. I live in Texas for the last couple of years. And one of the things I do as a hobby is I listen to Christian talk radio. I really enjoy it. And especially as I travel in the Bible Belt, I travel to Louisiana, Arkansas, etc., etc. I just find it a nice, good old, Christian talk radio station and listen in. And a lot of times the conversation happens to be about Islam and how evil it is, and how demonic it is, and how evil the Quran is. And then they'll even quote verses from the Quran to show us how evil it is, right? And those kinds of things are not just found on the radio now. There are YouTube videos about this stuff. There's blogs dedicated to it. There's all this, literature about how corrupted the book is and how evil its teachings are, etc., etc. And I can argue, outside of the biases, a lot of the problem also is people feel like they read the translation of the text and they are ready to say, I know what's going on. I know exactly what's taking place here. And they don't. They're so far from what's actually taking place in the text, it's laughable. Like, I listen to that stuff and I laugh, and then I cry. Right? I cry because there is somebody listening to that stuff and is actually saying, yeah, that's what it says. That is in fact what it says. So instead of producing tafsir literature, because tafsir literature is mostly written for Muslims, so it has a lot of Muslim terminology. So when a Muslim reads it, they might know what this means and that means. But when a non-Muslim reads that, they're not going to know what that's talking about. They're really not going to understand what that kind of literature is talking about. So there's some good efforts that have been made towards this end. A handful that personally encourage me. So I'd like to at least introduce you to one of them. One of them is called Select Passages from the Quran by Professor Meir from Michigan State University originally. Select Passages from the Quran. It's a book, dedicating itself to analysis of certain passages in the Quran from a literary point of view for a general audience, not for a religious or a Muslim audience, for a general audience. And that's important, because at least it's a start. At least that gets us started in appreciating it somewhat.